All right, good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm going to give you about a 20-minute presentation that is a 101 of neighborhood change 101. And then we're going to have about 10 minutes where you can ask me much more specific questions about Greenville and your neighborhood, and we'll try to bring it down to earth, if you will, bring it down to the Emerald City here to answer some of your questions. And I'll be around the rest of the morning through lunch, so I'm happy to talk with everybody over that time period. So I want to thank Mrs. Hines, the councilmen, and Tiana for setting this up and for inviting me to come to Greenville. I'm embarrassed to say that I've been in North Carolina 38 years. I have never been to Greenville. Yeah, I know, right? Bad citizen of the state. Maybe it's because of the football loss a couple of years ago, but we won't talk about that. So it's great to be here. I've been impressed so far with what I've seen. I'm certainly impressed by the turnout for this meeting. When you get this kind of invitation, you don't know whether you're going to have 8 or 10 people or 50, and I understand we have 80 people registered for this, so it really shows the commitment on the part of the neighborhood groups to improving the city and improving their local neighborhood, so I'm very impressed with that. I'm impressed with the fact that there is a system here also where the city supports the neighborhood groups, and the neighborhood groups have a venue for getting their perspectives in front of the city council. So I learned a lot already in the very short time I've been here. So let me begin then, talking about, and this is preaching to the choir, I know, but I wanted to start out with what's it all about, right? So why are neighborhoods important? And the answer, and there may be certainly other answers, certainly neighborhoods are where we live, right, on a day-to-day basis. We experience them in the morning, in the evening, on the weekends. It's what we're most familiar with. And familiarity promotes security. So we feel secure, hopefully, feel secure in our neighborhoods. And if we don't, it's a problem. We need to address those problems. Neighborhoods are where we invest, both economically and socially. So if we're homeowners, we have an investment in our property, and what happens in the surrounding neighborhood has a direct impact on the value of our property. So your house can be beautiful, but if the houses around you are in disrepair, if it's high crime, your house is going to be worth a lot less. So you have an economic investment. But equally importantly, I would argue, there's a social investment. People are invested, even though they may not know all their neighbors, they still are familiar with them. They have social networks in their neighborhoods. So and they have an emotional commitment, an emotional attachment to their neighborhoods in most instances. And then thirdly, neighborhoods impact the opportunities that are available to us. So where we live largely determines our educational experiences, quality of the school, impact the availability of jobs in the local area. So neighborhoods are important in the range of opportunities that we have available to us. Okay, so with that brief introduction, let me give you just a very quick overview of the way that the thinking on neighborhood change has evolved over the years. This is sort of maybe a little academic, but I think there's some important points that I will bring out that you'll be able to utilize in what you do. So it all started back in the early 1900s with what are called invasion and succession models. And basically, the idea was that the businesses, particularly the office businesses, office, the corporations in the central city, as a town grows, will move into the surrounding area that in that time was often manufacturing areas. And then the manufacturing areas will then move out to a little further to where the low-income housing is located. And then the low-income housing will move out to where the middle-income, so it's sort of like throwing a stone in a pond. And you have these ripples that go out from the middle. And the argument was that's why neighborhoods change, because these dominant land uses, the office in particular, will start to encroach on the surrounding land uses and then displace them. They move out, they move out, they move out. So that was the first idea, and there's some validity to that, but it really didn't capture in any kind of sophisticated, nuanced way why individual neighborhoods change. So the next idea involved the concepts of filtering and life cycle models. Filtering is a little bit similar to the invasion succession ideas in the sense that the argument was that housing is built, and over time, as that housing and the neighborhood surrounding the housing deteriorate, right, run down, and new infusions of investment are needed both in the neighborhood and in the housing unit. And in many instances, people make the decision to not make that investment, but to move to newer housing on the periphery of the city. Of course, the developers like that. The developers are out there building new housing. It's going to be more modern. It's going to have your granite countertops and open floor plans and whatever. So what happens then, the higher income people move out. The lower income people then in the worst housing, the middle income people will then move into the housing that's vacated by the higher income people, and then the lower income people will move into the housing that's vacated by the middle income people. So that's the idea of housing filtering down through the socioeconomic system over time. And similar to that is the idea of life cycles. And that is, the argument was, well, neighborhoods are like biological organisms. They are born, they mature, they start to grow old, and at some point, they die. And at that point, you bring the bulldozers in, you clear it, and you start it all over again, right? Just like life, just like life. And it's kind of an compelling image. Problem is, it's not really accurate in many instances. Again, it has some validity, but there are many, many instances where it just doesn't happen that way. So, and the other problem with both of the invasion succession and filtering life cycle models is that what we talk about as deterministic. It's like, this is the way it happens. It's like nature, right? This is the way it happens, and there's really not a whole lot you can do about it. So just deal with it. And that's not a very productive way to think about managing neighborhood change. So then, moving forward, about 1950 or so, some sociologists came along and said, you know, there are many neighborhoods in which, because people are attached to those neighborhoods, that they will actually defend the neighborhoods and resist neighborhood change. And you see many, many instances of older neighborhoods that are very, very well maintained. They haven't filtered down. They haven't gone through the life cycle model. So how do you explain that? And they explained it by this notion of, if people are attached to their neighborhood, willing to work, willing to invest, then this life cycle model is not valid. Moving forward again, in the 60s and 70s, People talked about institutional models. So frankly, the Marxists got involved and said, well, neighborhood change is really about the moneyed investors and the developers, and they just want to make money, and they look at neighborhoods and they say, that property is undervalued. Let's invest in that neighborhood. We don't really care about the people and what happens to them. It's all about making money, and we'll be able to make a lot of cash from this transition that will precipitate. Again, this was kind of deterministic. It suggested that these moneyed people and organizations were going to get their way, and that neighborhoods were just passive recipients or victims, if you will. So again, deterministic. So myself and a colleague, way back in 1996, came up with what we call a synthetic model. Not synthetic in terms of like synthetic fabrics, but synthetic in terms of synthesis. So we looked at all these models and said, well, what can you take from each of them, and what would be helpful for people who are trying to do something, intervene in neighborhood change. And we came up with our own model, as I say, and it focuses on, and this is all of a sudden not working. Maybe you could just advance it. Yeah. See, it might be the batteries. Okay, so we came up with a model that really focuses on 4 issues. And actually, I have not nearly enough, but I made some copies of this to hand out and leave with you. And I've got 30 copies that I'll pass out. But basically, it suggests that there are 4 important things that you need to know when you're analyzing neighborhood change. First of all, who are the key actors involved? Secondly, what are the key decisions that they're making that precipitate neighborhood change? Thirdly, what's the decision basis for those decisions? Why are they making those decisions? And fourthly, how can those decisions be influenced? So this is anything but deterministic. This is, let's look at who's making what decisions and see how we can impact those decisions, right? Okay, so I don't have time to go through all these categories. You'll see there's 2 more slides here. But let's just talk through a couple of them. So, go back, please. Go back to the first, yeah. So let's talk about residents. So obviously, residents in neighborhoods are key actors. And what's the key decision? The key decision is to fight or to flight, to leave. And what's the decision basis for that decision? Why are they making those decisions? Well, it has to do generally with the quality of life that they're experiencing, what the neighborhood looks like, what it's like socially, and it has to do with community attachment. To what extent are they really attached to this community, or would they just as soon move away? They're not involved with the neighborhood group, they're not involved with their neighbors, they don't really like their house too much, but those tend to be rare people. Most people have some attachment, and to the extent you can further that attachment, the better. So that's the decision basis, and then how can you influence those? Public investments, so the city can come in and improve the physical infrastructure, improve the parks, improve the sidewalks, the streets, signage, whatever needs to be done. Housing rehabilitation can be spurred through public programs, through private initiatives. So getting people to fix up their homes. Cities have various kinds of subsidy programs for low-income people, typically, to help them do that. And also to organize neighborhood groups so that people don't feel alone. People don't feel like, oh, wow, I don't like how these changers are going in the neighborhood, but there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm out of here. If there's a neighborhood organization, they say, I don't like these changes that I see happening in the neighborhood. Hey, let me get together with my neighbors and see if, as a neighborhood, we can do something about this. Now there's hope and possibility. So that's looking at residents. Landlords, to invest in their property or not invest. What's the decision basis? Main one, typically, economic return. If they invest, that means they're probably going to want to raise the rent. Can they raise the rent enough to pay off the debt that they've taken out in order to make the improvements in the property? But also, commitment to the area. Some landlords are not just mercenary. They're not just in it for business. Some landlords truly care about an area and are willing to do a little bit more accordingly. And then the decision basis, we talked about commitment to the area, and then how influenced. Cities have rental rehabilitation programs to help landlords fix up their properties. There are rental subsidy programs that can help residents afford properties that have been fixed up, and code enforcement, where the city looks and says, hey, this property is deficient in these ways, and you need to get with the regulation or we're going to fine you. So that's the sort of carrots and sticks, and good programs that focus in on housing improvement in neighborhoods have both. They have carrots and they have sticks. Let's go to the next slide, please. So, neighborhood associations. Given who's in the audience, I thought I would go over this one. What are the key decisions that you're making? To resist change and specific types of change, and or really to influence change. So here's where I would argue resisting change is probably not the best approach. Figuring out what kinds of change you don't want, figuring out how you can accommodate some of the new demands, how you can accommodate, for example, some higher density housing in your neighborhood, if it's appropriate, would be a good thing, I would argue, for the neighborhood organizations to think about and consider. What's your decision basis? Your perceptions of the problem. How are you seeing, what problems are you seeing, and how are you understanding how those problems came about? And the provision and the interests represented. So some neighborhood organizations are basically 100% homeowners, even though 50% or maybe 60% of the neighborhood are renters. Not great. Homeowners are then going to see the problems through their own lens. And hopefully your organizations are more diverse and have both homeowners and renters. You'll have a better sense of the issues, and you'll, I think, be better able to address those issues. All right, so, and then let me stop there because I don't want to go beyond my allotted time. But I'll, as I say, I have some copies of this, and you can look at the various actors. So let me just say, let me just read the actors. There's 9 groups of actors. So you've got residents, landlords, local businesses, to the extent that you have a business community either in or on the edge of your neighborhood, neighborhood associations, public officials, certainly a very important group of people, and banks and insurance companies. On to the last slide, for this part of the presentation, real estate agents, developers, and the media, the press. Those are the 9 groups that are all making decisions that are affecting your neighborhoods. And if you understand their decision basis, you can then understand how you can approach them, how you can influence what they're doing, okay? So what I want to leave you with here is the idea that you're in control. This is something, there's nothing deterministic about neighborhood change. There are people and organizations that are making decisions, and you have the power to influence those decisions. Okay, on to the next slide, please. I have 2 more slides. I want to make 3 other points about neighborhood change. First of all, that economic and social changes at the national, regional, and city level are really important to what happens at the neighborhood level. Now, the most obvious example of that in recent times is the foreclosure crisis, right? Greedy people, frankly, in Wall Street and other places around the country decided to make a lot of money selling terrible loans to people, some of which took advantage of that, albeit, but nonetheless, and it led to this incredible increase in foreclosures, and a lot of neighborhoods, low income and moderate income and even high income, really got nailed with the foreclosure crisis, and so you had all these abandoned properties in neighborhoods. That's something that happened at the national level, but it has a real dramatic effect at the local level. So you got to be watching for those trends and those crises and be ready to step in quickly. Particularly the city needs to be ready to step in quickly to do something like figure out how to get those foreclosed properties occupied again. Okay. Second key point is the location, the physical attributes, and the social characteristics of neighborhoods play an important role. So all neighborhoods are not the same. If you're close to downtown or close to the university, you're going to have different challenges, particularly in terms of the potential for gentrification. The housing type in your neighborhood is going to be important in whether your neighborhood is going to change and how it changes. The safety, the race, the ethnicity of a neighborhood also is going to be important to take into consideration. And we have to understand that even these national and regional trends, they don't affect all neighborhoods equally. They're going to affect some neighborhoods a lot more than others. And then lastly, to effectively address neighborhood change, we need to anticipate it and we need to act early. All right? Once the change is well underway, it's kind of the old adage about the horse being out of the barn. It's out of the barn, you really can't get it back in again. It's too late. So you've got to try to get out in front of these major changes. And if we go to the last slide I have, this is Malik's 4 steps in leading neighborhood change, getting out in front of it. Number 1, and I'm not sure if you have this here in Greenville or not, but you need to understand how neighborhoods in your city are changing. So a lot of cities have neighborhood databases. So every year they update the statistics on all sorts of characteristics by neighborhood. What the housing prices are doing, what the income composition of the neighborhood is doing, how many foreclosures there are in the area, how many abandonments, vacant lots, all kinds of different data items. Durham just recently developed one of these as well. So you can, and those are publicly available, so people can look and say, hey, how's my neighborhood changing? And look at some of those early indicators of it's going up, it's going down, it's the same, right? So you're educated, you're aware of what's happening, and hence you can get out in front. Build the market, right? If you want to improve neighborhoods, you want to build the market. What does that mean? It means improve the housing stock through various kinds of public initiatives and potentially private initiatives. You want to improve the public infrastructure, fix the streets, maybe some new sidewalks where they're needed, refurbish the park, and you want to increase neighborhood stability. The easiest way to do that is to increase the home ownership rate in a neighborhood. So have various programs that make it easier for residents to buy homes in the area. However, number 3 here is really equally important, particularly if you're at all interested in issues like social justice. So why should we improve this neighborhood if, in fact, it means all the original residents who are attached to the area, who have a history in the area, are just simply displaced to some other area that's not so good, right? So there's an equal responsibility, particularly for the public sector, to make sure that you're promoting equitable revitalization. What does that mean? It's easy said, sometimes hard to accomplish, but it means preserving affordable housing, and there are a variety of ways we can talk about for doing that, preventing displacement, and building resident economic resources, so basically community development, so that people can afford some higher rents. So some national research shows that gentrifying areas actually have less outmigration of low-income households than non-gentrifying areas. Well, that's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? Why is that? Because the low-income households, they like this improved neighborhood. And they just find ways to stay there, even if it means they're paying more for housing, they get a second job, but they really like and appreciate the improvements in the neighborhood. So there are ways that we can promote equitable revitalization. Then lastly, change strategies over time. That is, ask, is the strategy still relevant? So as neighborhoods revitalize, some programs will no longer be relevant, and other programs will be needed. One quick example, and then I'm done, is that sometimes tax breaks are offered to developers who develop in areas that a city wants to see revitalized. But at what point, if the neighborhood starts to revitalize, at what point do you not need those tax incentives anymore? What you find is a lot of times, even after tax incentives are needed, they're still being offered. And the city is giving away, if you will, some of its taxing income when it doesn't really need to. So anyway, that's an overview of what I have to say about neighborhood change and how you can have an impact. And again, if I want to leave you with one point, it's there is nothing inevitable about neighborhood change. It's a result of a variety of decisions made by key actors, and you can influence, particularly if you get together with some of the other key actors, so the city cooperating with neighborhood groups, you can really take control of the destiny of your neighborhoods.